I'm Nicole Frisina. I'm a manager with Your Part-Time Controller LLC out of their New York market. I've been with YPTC for 8 years, and we help provide controller and CFO services for nonprofit organizations, including internal controls, strategic expertise, and financial management consulting. I would like to introduce my panelists today. We have Michael Bellavia. He is an Emmy-winning producer and CEO for HelpGood, a digital-first marketing and communications agency, and a certified B Corp focused on social impact, working with nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, universities, and purpose-driven brands. HelpGood's offices are located in Los Angeles and New York City, and their clients include UCLA, Ad Council, North Shore Animal League, Planned Parenthood, and Housing Works. Welcome, Michael.
Hello.
And I would like to introduce Nick Lynch, who has built his career by developing solutions that enable brands to target their audiences on digital and social media. As a former Make-A-Wish recipient and cancer survivor, Nick's passion for nonprofits led him to create Kaleidoscope.io, a platform designed to help such organizations thrive in this digital age. Recognized for his contributions to social tech innovation, Nick's expertise and achievements have earned him coverage in major media outlets, and he's the author of the upcoming book, Impact Redefined, which will be published by Wiley Publishing in May 2024. Welcome, Nick.
Hello.
Hi. So we're going to talk today about social media and how it can help amplify nonprofit stories and how they can help them reach broader audiences. And I'm going to start with you, Mike, first. And I wonder if you can first talk about defining social media, and then how do nonprofits strategize with social media to help maximize their impact?
So social media really at its core is two-way communication. I think most folks use it for one way, pushing out information, just like kind of broadcasting, like running into a room saying, hey, I'm here. But that's not what you would usually do when you walk into a party. Usually you would kind of wait, ease into it, try to meet people, talk, have a little conversation, go back and forth, find out a little bit about them. So it really is just kind of a way of doing that, like what you would normally do, just in a digital format. And in a much bigger room, potentially. Like instead of talking just to the folks you know, you could be talking to folks that you've never met before and finding out things from them that excite them. And then you could use that and pull it into your conversation as to how you talk about your organization and what you do, so that it really connects with the folks that are following you or that are engaging with you. So that was that first part of it. I just look at it as a platform to really do what you normally do when you're meeting folks, just on a much grander scale. But really two-way is the big thing to think of there. And then what was the other part?
Oh, yeah. So how do nonprofits strategize their social media to help them maximize their impact?
It depends on the nonprofit you're talking to. I think some of them might say, it's whatever the intern wants to do. I think in other cases, it might be we're doing what we're told to do. And in other cases, I think it's just like the last thing on the list, like, oh, we have to do it. Whereas with a lot of the organizations we work with, they take it seriously. We have to draft, conduct a lot of research. We draft a strategic plan that outlines their goals, objectives, audiences, key messages, strategies, tactics, and how we're going to measure success along the way. Like it's a very regimented process, but I think that's a full spectrum of the kinds of clients that we have worked with. I know, and for our own agency, I would say this, like social media is such a slog and it is a bear, and we don't do a great job of it for ourselves. We do a great job of it for our clients. But if you look at our socials for an indication of like, please don't at this point, because it's difficult. It's like all of a sudden, and I came out of kind of the entertainment industry and entertainment marketing. All of a sudden, like 10 years ago or so, everybody had to become like an entertainment studio and like start producing content and churning things out and worrying about like, hey, did that post work over the weekend? And like, what's it going to play like over the next 3 weeks? It's like, what? That's not what we do. But now you do. And now everybody does. So if you're not saying something you're still saying something even if you're not doing a great job at social media. So because it is one of those things that everybody looks for and it's always there. So I'd say don't try to be too hard on yourself, but it is best to have, even if it's a one-page plan, of how you're going to approach social, given the constraints of resources, budget, time that you have.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And then Nick, I'm gonna go to you from a different point of view and we'll talk about influencer marketing. Can you define that first? And what is influencer marketing?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think that it's sort of evolved from branded content 10 years ago to now these, influencers doing dances and all these other things on social media. It's now like this creator economy, which is a multi-$100+ billion a year industry that has hundreds of thousands of people on every single social media platform creating content and building an audience and having a platform. And so today's sort of view of influencer marketing is really anybody who has a voice on a social media platform. It doesn't matter if you have 5 followers or 5 million followers, everybody has some level of influence as a creator on these platforms. And so, what we really focus on really is about how can we leverage people who have synergistic values and vision and alignment with what you're doing in your mission to a platform and a voice and an opinion that people want to take seriously and listen to and engage with. And so, like I said, it can be anybody from probably 50 followers to 5 million billion followers, doesn't really matter. And it doesn't necessarily even matter the platform. It's really about, are you on a platform having some type of opinion and some type of voice with some type of following?
Yeah. And so for a nonprofit, like what are some ways they can sort of benefit from using that and to help amplify their stories?
Yeah, for sure. So the same way, like to Mike's point, like social media is a slog. I mean, there's so much things that you have to figure out and kind of get right. And you really have to study it and it has to be kind of your full focus. Well, the good thing about the influencer side is that that's what most of these people have dedicated now their time and their focus to. They understand how to use the platforms. They understand how to storytell really well in a nuanced way, depending on which platform they're on. They've cultivated an audience that's engaged with them, that's connecting with them, that actually listens to the things that they say. For example, again, 50 or 5 million, if you went and saw the new Dune movie and everybody that follows you knows that you're like a diehard science fiction guy or girl or person and says that Dune movie, thumbs down, your followers, whether 5 or 5 million, will probably take that advice to heart and think about, okay, maybe I'll just wait for it to come to stream at home, right? And so, from a nonprofit perspective, it really helps you figure out how to reach and even teach new people in new ways and storytell and connect and really figure out how to amplify and broadcast your mission. And so where in one way, maybe in one room, you have been talking about your mission or the initiatives or the programs within your nonprofit a certain way, working with an influencer or creator may look at that and say, oh, wow, I can communicate it in these different ways and say these different things and be able to really reach and communicate it in new ways. And so that's I think the biggest benefit is getting somebody to leverage their platform and the social media platforms in general and their expertise and understanding how to communicate something that could be very complex into 15 seconds and working with them to amplify that mission and that message that you're working.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I saw a chat come through in the or a question come through in the chat. And what are some like recommendations on social media platforms that you recommend, either from even influencer marketing or even from the social media side? I guess, Mike, if you want to go first.
Really, that depends on who you are as an organization, who you're trying to target, speak to, what you have resources for, and like what you might have easy expertise in kind of pursuing. So we had a client that I would never have suggested take a look at TikTok, but there was somebody on their staff whose kid is a TikTok influencer. And so TikTok and that kid would talk about mental health oriented things, and that kid turned into a huge asset for that organization. Whereas we would normally not do that for a lot of clients just because they don't have somebody on their staff that can authentically is like kind of a TikTok native of that platform and understand what works there. With other ones, usually with most organizations that have like maybe nobody in marketing or like one person or something like that, I'd say start off easy. Look at platforms that you personally are attuned to, or that you have a willingness to actually venture into, and just crush it on one or two. But don't think that you have to be everywhere all at once, other than just like setting up a profile. If you want a backlink, fine. But you don't have to master all of these things, but just try to be like really find the one or two that really could move a needle for your organization and just really focus on that. That could be LinkedIn if you're trying to talk to professionals. That could be TikTok. That could be Reddit. It could be any one of these things. That could even be Facebook if you're trying to like, so we work on the Smokey Bear campaign, and Facebook, like he's got a lot of old folks that are fans of his still. Facebook is still like one of the bigger platforms for him. But Instagram is now like kind of, it took about a year, 4 years to get to 100,000 followers for him. That was a slog, and he's famous, really. And then it took 4 days to get to another 75,000. And that just happened like 2 weeks ago off of a couple of really odd things that I would not have thought would have worked. Basically, it was like, I think you could pay for influencers sometimes, but we made as Smokey a comment on one influencer's post that we had no relationship with, and frankly don't initially want being associated with, because he was lighting a fire like recklessly. So basically Smokey said, don't do that. And it brought in literally 50,000 people from that one comment, because other people recognized that this person was being a jackass. And these were the jackass's fans still recognizing, yeah, that's not cool. So sometimes you don't even have to pay for kind of influencer engagements or plan them. But I'd say really look at, do a self-assessment of what you can afford time-wise, because that's part of your equation there, as well as like where you think you'd be fine with spending some of your time, kind of, because you really have to invest in it. Don't take it willy-nilly. It's not something to just slough off to an intern, really, or a volunteer, unless there is like kind of a strong strategy around how you're approaching it.
So you're kind of bringing up a good point there of, if there is like limited resources, right? We're talking about, let's say a small nonprofit that has maybe 10 employees in the whole, out of their whole organization. Like, how do you like sort of manage, like effectively manage a social media platform? Let's say they just want to do something simple and start with Instagram, like how do you recommend, how they do that with limited budget and resources that they have?
So first, I'd make sure that you have like leadership approval and leadership sign off and involvement to an extent. They don't have to post for you, but I think that makes sense that they're really on board with what it can do and understand what the capabilities of it are. Then I think you're really kind of going through like a regular kind of marketing plan, setting what your major goal is and like what your objective is going to be, what audience you're talking to, and then what main strategy is it? Is it that I want to use social media to get people to sign up on our email list, and then I want to get 30 people in the next 6 months? Or is it I want to try to get money out of social media, or I want to promote these things, or I want to build a community of concerned moms talking about their drug addicted kids? I think each of those things would then lead you on a path to saying like, you know what, maybe our social media is just interacting in this private Facebook group. And that is our social media plan, because that might be the best, like maybe other people have done the legwork for you. In other cases, it might mean, hey, let's go over here to TikTok and start doing goofy dances while we're talking about serious subject matter that you would normally not be dancing to. But I wouldn't say start taking dance lessons per se, but really it's taking stock of what assets you do have and what would be easiest for you to kind of pursue.
Thank you. And then Nick, I would say, Mike touched on like, what are some social media platforms a little bit, like, what would you say are ones you would recommend from an influencer
No,
marketing
for sure.
side?
I love what you said, Mike, and I want to double click and zoom in on a couple of things. One is that I think it's super important to double, triple reiterate what you said, Mike, in terms of you do not have to be everywhere all at once. I think there is a intrinsic need that you need to be on every single platform. You need to be communicating on every single platform. And ultimately, I always initially just start with just focus on one and be really, 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 really good on one. and build an audience on that one. And that one will depend on the organization and your target audiences and who you're trying to reach out to and who you're trying to build a community around. But ultimately, I think that if you start with one and feel confident and okay that one is going to be great for you and really just focus your time on one, it's awesome. And like Mike said, that could be Instagram, that could be Facebook, where there's a slightly older demographic that's still very active, could be LinkedIn, it could be a lot of places. But I think it just generally thinking one is okay. You don't have to be everywhere all at once. The other thing that I think is really important, that I think he connected really well from some earlier comments in the Smokey Bear piece, is that it is a two-way conversation, and Smokey is kind of an influencer in his own right. So the fact that now he's going and commenting on other people, that draws a conversation back to you. And so as a nonprofit, I mean, you are also kind of an influencer as well. You have this platform, people want to be connected with you. They want to hear what you're doing. And so going out and finding synergistic people who are having conversations about things that you're passionate about as a nonprofit and leaving comments and being consistent in doing that I think is really important as well. And then the third piece is LinkedIn. I think even as an influencer perspective, and I'll tell you why I think this in a second, but is probably the largest opportunity around. And the biggest influencers that you have as an organization are your board and your leadership, particularly the CEO. And so if you are creating and posting content on LinkedIn, you should absolutely make sure that your leadership shares that content from their own personal account and makes comments or attaches their thoughts and feelings specifically in their voice to it. Same with the board. I've found this time and time again where when we've built content from an influencer perspective, we'll build like media kits that may allow our influencer partners to easily just copy paste captions and maybe add stuff that they want to, easily post images. When we give that same stuff to a nonprofit's board and have them post around an event, they may not have the same reach and they may not have the same level of engagement, but the 100 or 200 or 500 people that are reached and the 40, 50, 60 people that engage and click on the links that they share, they end up donating, and they end up donating way higher than if you were to get an influencer do it, right? So I'm kind of bounced around there, but I really wanted to just highlight a lot of the stuff that Mike said because I think it's so important. And when you think about your influencer strategy, it's really, I find LinkedIn to be really strong for, again, like a corporate audience and working with your board and your leadership and even people on your team as like influencers to amplify the content. Depending on the audience, Instagram seems to be still a big winner for influencer marketing. There are a lot of amazing nonprofits doing a lot of amazing work and influencer partnerships on TikTok. I'm still not fully sold on TikTok as a sort of full funnel or a some type of platform that drives results, but man, is it great for awareness and is it great for engagement? So it depends on your goals. I think from an influencer perspective, it depends on your audience. But from a definitely a standard bearer of influencer marketing, we are consistently on and perform well on Instagram and on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's funny. You both are talking about Smokey the Bear, and I'm thinking about the thing that happened with Elmo a couple weeks ago. Like he put out something on X, right? Like saying like, how's everybody feeling? And people just reacted to it, and you would think Elmo from Sesame Street, more kid friendly. And it just sort of blew up from that. So it's kind of funny, just how something's very simple could go way larger than you ever anticipated it to be.
Yeah, well, even on that, as an example, that's an amazing example of what Mike said in terms of a two-way communication. Like he literally was asking, how's everybody doing? And in the hopes of creating that two-way conversation, right?
Right, exactly. So Nick, we have a question for you that just came in through the chat. So it said, for social services nonprofits, what would you suggest is the best type of content and subject matter to get attention?
Well, I mean, for any content,
specifically more social services type of a nonprofit. So those dealing with mental health or social service resources.
Yep. So I on any content, I always focus on the why, the what, and the how, right? And so the why can be specific to your mission. It might be specific to a particular group of people or a person that you served. It might be the reason why your executive director has been there for X amount of years, or the executive director is in the role that they are, in terms of like what the heart wants, right? So like that's the why. The how could be the specific things that you do. The people in the background, the people that are servicing and driving the mission forward every single day. That could be paid staff, that could be volunteers. And how, when, why. Yeah. So like, and like ultimately it's finding authentic stories to elevate, right? And really trying to figure out how you can create stories that people connect with. And that's why influencer marketing is really valuable and important, because they're able to tell their stories most natively to the platforms. I see you're asking LinkedIn. I think that from a corporate audience, that's where your board and your leadership comes in, and really trying to figure out why, the why stories of why the people join the board. My guess is there are people on the board that have very specific lived experiences that they can tell or share, or might be open to sharing about their mental health, or why they joined a mental health or wellness organization, and all those types of things. So those are the types of authentic stories that I think are really important to elevate if they're open to sharing. And obviously they have a deep connection with your organization if they're already part of the board, or if they're leadership. And I think that's, to me, when you think about LinkedIn, it's about using your board and your leadership to tell those stories and to share those stories authentically.
Like, what are some, you go to find an influencer, somebody who can help you sort of like amplify your story. What are some key considerations and potential risks, that are involved when looking into that?
Sure. The place I always tell people to start is look who's following you on social media. They're already aligned with your mission. They're already, engaged in some way or form. And really look at who's following you and who are those people, and what are they saying and what are they doing. I think that's a really great place to start. Some considerations. I mean, again, the size of their following doesn't matter. It's really like the authenticity and the connection to your mission, and the alignment of your mission. And I think that's honestly the most important thing in terms of considering who you want to work with. And a great example is this. And I think a lot of people think like, well, if I go and find an influencer that has 100,000, 500,000, 1 million, if I get Kim Kardashian to say something, that's going to be, a big win, or some other celebrity, right? And if that celebrity has never talked about you as a nonprofit specifically, or hasn't voiced their, support and passion for a mission generally that is aligned with you, it's not going to be as big as you had hoped, right? You really want to make sure that the people that you're partnering with, there already is authentic alignment, or else their audience and their fans on their platform just won't engage with it. So that's definitely a consideration. I think that from an influencer perspective, the risks have been significantly mitigated over the last 10 years. If you were to ask me this 10 years ago, I would say it's the Wild West. People are saying and doing crazy stuff. Like, I wouldn't do it necessarily right now, because there's still so many things that need to be figured out. But now this creator economy, this multi-$100 billion business, I mean, that's what it is now. People are taking this as their career. They understand that their careers are on the line. There is now somewhat of a general process that people follow, that people expect. And so, yes, are people going to say stuff? Yes, that happened before influencer marketing, that happened afterwards, when you worked with celebrities and they went it off and maybe did something that wasn't aligned with your mission. I mean, that you couldn't control that. Things will happen, but the risk is so much lower now, and there should be the utmost confidence to be able to test these things now, because the seriousness and the professionalism that is now there in the creator economy and taking content. But definitely do your diligence, right? Like, look at previous content that has been created by these potential influencer or creator partners. Google their name. Look at other platforms, not just the one that you want to work with them on, to see what else they're saying, because they may be angels on Instagram, but they may not be angels on X, right? So definitely do your due diligence. People are people, humans are humans. They make mistakes, things happen. But I think just generally speaking, the risk is relatively low if they're already out there building an audience. They're already doing probably other, if you've seen them do other integrations with like Coke or Pepsi or some of these other guys. So, there's definitely there's the risk has been mitigated significantly now that it's become a very lucrative career for people to do or to be in.
Yeah. And so we actually had a question in the chat, speaking about it being lucrative, like how do you decide when to boost posts and paid social media advertising? So a little bit different, but more like advertising on social media. But when do you think you need to make that sort of switch, possibly?
It depends on what your budget is. With one client that we had that had like barely any budget, it was just very ad hoc nature, really kind of fueling a flame that was already burning. So when something was starting to get a little traction, they would just throw more fuel on it, really. In other cases, they had certain things that they wanted to promote that really they wanted to make sure people saw. So like an event or some like it was only like one point in time and that's it. If we don't get the eyeballs on it, then that's done. Whereas with other clients, again, we have a whole plan around how we're going to invest in their paid media efforts on social, because in particular, social has become a very much a pay to play situation in many ways. Yes, we were talking about, look at what you could do with influencers for free and just make a comment. But it is very difficult to just like start out ground zero now than it was like maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even. Like, especially Facebook has been it's a totally different playground as far as like what your level of investment is. So I think part of that is just really what is your budget and what are the most important things for you, or are there key audiences that you're trying to reach? Because you can do segmentation now on these platforms and really deciding what you're going to kind of get behind. And one other thing on the LinkedIn side, that was where I dropped off. But one thing I wanted to mention is like there, regardless of like if it's mental health services or what, I would look at that's really an employment branding platform. So I would look at that. How are you describing when you're recruiting people? How are you describing the positions that you have out there? What is the information that you're including in that job posting? Because people will read into who you are as an organization by the way that you hire, how you describe yourselves, what you show as your values, what kinds of folks that you are looking to employ. So I would not like overlook how those posts, even when you're promoting, hey, we're hiring, what that looks like, because people will read into that for sure.
Yeah. And then I want to, while you were off, I had asked Nick about some of the risks from an influencer marketing. I wanted to ask you from a social media side, like what are some of the biggest challenges that nonprofits may face when it comes to like social media?
I think two things. One, not having a plan when it comes to a crisis moment, like not having any idea of how to respond, and then you're trying to respond to it in the thick of a fire where you're getting canceled or flamed or whatever it is. Really, I know you don't want to think through it, but if you have a PR team, work with them to establish one, or just think through what are some of the things that would be like the worst things that could happen to our organization, and really think through what you would do. The other thing I would say is have a plan for the great things that can happen. Because if you're unprepared for like all of a sudden getting a ton of eyeballs on you, like if Smokey got all that attention all of a sudden, and then we had no plan to produce additional content on Instagram, or if he didn't have a website that could take people in to sign up for a newsletter, well, then you really kind of lost your opportunity there. We had a hospital system where out of the blue, some celebrity mentioned them and they got a ton of followers all of a sudden, but they were all from like 14-year-old girls because it was like a Justin Bieber like celebrity who said something. So do they want those 14-year-old girls for the long haul? Maybe not necessarily. They took a path of like not connecting with them again, but is there a way to just try to bring them into the fold in some way in a very different manner? Like, could you establish some young people's council or something like that that spoke to them in ways that you would normally not talk to that audience? So I would just say plan for the good, plan for the bad, have an emergency plan and have a success plan, really, if you can.
Yeah, I think that's valid in anything, right? It's like it's always planning ahead and just thinking about how do you react to anything bad or good, regardless if it's social media, disaster recovery, everything, right? It's always being able to plan ahead.
Yeah, I did not plan ahead for the internet going out, but luckily I had cell service and I had a phone and I'm in this padded room so I can go crazy and hear myself. So
And that's what social media is, right? It's like just reacting to
Yeah.
whatever's happening in that moment. So all
Well,
is good.
that is a big component of social, is also being nimble to take advantage of those real-time opportunities. I can't tell you the number of times that we've been able to take advantage of like trending hashtags or like of the moment news items. And they make a big difference. They really can be kind of outsized opportunities. We've won a bunch of awards just for real-time opportunities that we jumped on for clients.
So we had another question come through in the chat, and this can kind of go to either one of you. It's, what's the best strategy for targeting a relatively small demographic if it's sort of like really a niche kind of, market for a nonprofit?
I mean, I think it would depend on the demographic, right? Because I mean, I have conversations all the time where if you're trying to reach, especially here in LA, like if you're trying to reach an older demographic, there may be that demographic may still be reading a newspaper or buying a magazine or watching like linear TV, right? So then maybe it's trying to figure out how to get local ad buys in these different places, right? If it's a younger audience, then maybe it's more on some sort of digital platform or social media, right? So I think it depends on the demographic. I think more than I see it's hyper local, which I mean, lots of nonprofits are hyper local. So I think that the thinking through like who your ideal, we talk about all the time, like when we're building influencer marketing pieces, but like who your ideal customer profile is, who your ideal donor profile is, and like really trying to think through who you're trying to reach. And then from there, think about like where do they get their information? Where do they consume media? How do they do that? When do they do that? Why do they do that? And in thinking through about those things, I think can help determine where to best allocate your time or your resources, again, depending on your goals and depending on the target demographic.
In New York City, we work with Housing Works, and basically the challenge is they wanted to reach LGBTQ sex workers in New York City to have them become influencers to get other LGBTQ folks to come in to get PrEP medication. So it's kind of like a big ask to get somebody to go to the doctor and actually show up for an appointment and to talk about sex and openly about it and STI prevention and everything. We wound up using like some of the hookup apps like Grindr and Scruff. Like it's social media. It's not the most obvious answer. I think some of that requires like, yeah, like maybe social is not the salvo. Maybe you go with newspapers if it is the old folks in LA. Maybe it is very different types of social media that if you're not queer, you're probably not using it yourself, but maybe it's something to investigate. Like what assets do these people actually use on a regular basis to create community and then go to where that community is. Don't just expect that you're going to plop a few things on Facebook and get them to show up to get PrEP medication in a doctor's office, because that probably ain't happening.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So coming with social media, like how do you measure the impact, that your efforts are making and using like analytics or insights? Like what are some strategies to help measure, you're on a platform, are you being successful with it?
So again, depends on what those goals are, having a clear mindset of like, are we going for an awareness play? So that would be impressions that you're measuring. Are we looking for engagement? We just want people chattering about us. So that would be just tracking engagements on each of these platforms. Maybe it's a video. Like in some cases, video views that you could get tracked are showing you views where somebody looked at it for 3 seconds. Is that enough for you? Or do you really need them to watch the entire video? Otherwise, it didn't count. So part of that is like really you assessing what is going to be considered a success for you, and then kind of making sure that when you're tracking the numbers along the way, like you're really looking at it with a kind of a strong eye to, did we really get the success that we wanted out of this? Or do we need to pay a different type of tier for investing in paid media to make sure that it's a full view of a video or something like that? In some cases, it's a more existential question in a way, because like with Smokey again, I use that since everybody knows that example, but like we're supposed to be preventing wildfire. If we have a tweet that goes viral, can I say that we prevented 16 wildfires because of that? No. we use a lot of proxy measures to show awareness, and we then say generally that awareness helps to translate into more people understanding about wildfire prevention and how it should be prioritized. But in some cases, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to draw a direct through line to what your true end goal is, and then what you're doing in social, because you could be crushing it, and then still racial equity in this country is abysmal. But you might be kind of really speaking to a lot of people that would be understanding it and right on your page of things. So I think you also have to align kind of your expectations of what you're truly measuring and the success that you might be having in your realm versus is that getting you to this grand kind of vision space that you're really trying to work towards.
Yeah. So Nick, for influencer marketing, can nonprofits use it to help with fundraising efforts?
Sure.
And what are some strategies you think that would be effective in that regard?
Yeah, no, for sure. You definitely can. And I think the three buckets. So our process that we usually take is we think through what the initial goals are, then we do the metric mapping, and then we figure out from a tactical perspective who aligns with the goals and the metric we're trying to achieve. And so from a fundraising perspective, you absolutely can leverage influencers. Sort of rule of thumb is that the smaller the following, the more engaged those influencer audiences are. Once you start to get to 7,500, 150, 250,000 and over, you get a bunch of influencers that have a megaphone and a platform and people listen to them, but the ability to sway that audience sort of, you see diminishing returns because they're there. The audience is less there to really deeply engage with that person and more just sort of be entertained by that person once you start to get to a higher piece. So we typically focus anywhere from, the 15,000 range to about 75,000 range from a follower perspective if we're going to do a fundraising campaign. Again, these are just sort of service level metrics in terms of how we start to filter things out. Where it gets to be really important around fundraising is identifying influencers in that range that are deeply, deeply aligned with your mission. So if you're a nonprofit that focuses on adoption, maybe you look for people who have been adopted or who are adopted parents, right? And so the closer you can get to an influencer that has been impacted or is affected in a positive way around your mission or particularly your nonprofit, the more likely you are to be able to see a return either on the investment that you make for paying the influencer or just generally working with an influencer to generate funds and do fundraising. But I think that those are the two high level, like service level criteria we look at is that sort of follower niche range, because we know that followers or I guess influencers with that audience size typically perform much better than their larger following counterparts, and the influencers that are deeply significantly like no farther than 1 degree of separation from your mission and or your nonprofit.
Yeah, so I'm just looking through some of the chat. We have some great questions in here. I want to see if I caught everybody's question with what we spoke about. But it's kind of
I did see the thing about the exploiting people's stories.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, talk about now. So if you want to maybe start there, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can talk about it a little bit because I'm a Make-A-Wish kid. Like for me, like Make-A-Wish can say and do anything with my story. If they asked me to do anything and to tell my story, like I would do it, right? So exploitation can be depending on the context, can be kind of an icky word. I think when it comes to creating content and aligning partners that will help you amplify and tell your story, you're not exploiting their story. I mean, they're wanting to be a part. Their story is a part of your mission and vice versa. And I think that if you are working with people who genuinely align with who you are and what you do, who have a story to tell and want to tell it, I wouldn't. And again, maybe this is my personal perspective, given that I would happily allow Make-A-Wish to tell my story in any form that they want. But I think that if they're aligned with who you are and what you do and are wanting to and open to sharing your story, then I don't think that's exploiting. That's communicating the impact of your mission. And I think that all the time when I share my Make-A-Wish story, it changes a lot of assumptions that people think about Make-A-Wish and what kind of kids get wishes. I think it shifts there's some empathy and some emotional pieces to it that weren't there if it was like just an employee, not just, but an employee or a leader that maybe hasn't been affected by the wish, but is obviously a part of it. So I think there's just something to be said about aligning with people who have a story to tell and want to tell it. Should you go out and try to coerce stories out of people, and should you push people who don't want to tell the story? No, then I would probably bucket that into the exploitation piece. But I think that finding people who want to tell their story and help and use that as part of their way to give back to the mission, I think isn't exploiting, but something that's really valuable and really important to share.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to how, Mike, you started. It's a two-way conversation. It's the same kind of understanding here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a permission-based thing in a way.
Right.
Clearly, Nick is giving permission willfully and fully. Like, I'm not going to burst into somebody's apartment and start saying, "Hey, I run HelpGood, and we're an agency." Like, I didn't have permission to walk into that room. Like, partly it's like you need permission to go into the space. You earn your right to kind of talk about yourself by also listening to others in that space and hear their stories. It really just is kind of basic level kind of social human interaction just plays out digitally instead.
Yeah. No, thank you both. So I want to kind of open up to the audience again, see if there's any other questions, maybe as they come through the chat. And while we're waiting for that, I would say, from Mike or Nick, like, how do you get started, right? I know we're saying it's so simple. It's like, just start a LinkedIn profile or start an Instagram profile, but like, have a plan. But I would say, like, what is like one thing you would tell everybody to do? Like, if you're like, okay, go today and at least get started, like, what is one piece of advice you would give to the audience today?
I mean, from an influencer perspective, look at who's following you, look at who's engaging with your content, look who's liking, look who's making comments, look who's sharing. Look at those people, because they are your nearest and dearest advocates already. You don't have to do a deep search of anything else. You just look through who's already following you, who's already commenting on you. And if there's alignment there and you think there's strategic value and they're open to partnering with you, then that's a great place to start. And again, they don't have to be a 5 million follower influencer. Some influencers may already follow you that have that size. I don't know. But I think starting with who's already following you is for sure the easiest way to start thinking about your influencer marketing strategy and your sort of your content partnership or your creator partnership strategy. And it gives you almost like you're talking to a friendly, like, I don't really know what I'm doing. You seem to do really well on these platforms. I'd love to figure out ways to better storytell and amplify. And that conversation is much more friendly and I think easier to have than somebody who doesn't know you and you haven't talked to and hasn't engaged with you. So I'd say start with your followers and go from there.
Yeah.
A lot of the work that we do starts with some form of research. So I would just say, listen first. Like, don't even worry about, I want to say this, right? This is the most important thing I need to say to these most important people. Just like, if you have the idea of like who these people are and like just a hypothesis of like, I think they might want to hear this, just first go to like Twitter or go to Facebook or go to any one of these social media platforms and start searching on hashtags or your keywords and really start seeing, what are people saying about this? And are a lot of people aligned with things that you would like to say? Or are they so diametrically opposed? Like, if you're an organization trying to advance trans rights, you may not want to be on X anymore. Or you may say, you know what? X is exactly the place we want to be because it's so foul now. And we really want to kind of change the dialogue that's there. Two different organizations may have very different reactions to each of these social platforms just based on kind of a social listening survey. And it doesn't have to be market research, very officious. I'd just say dive in for like a few days and see how people are talking about different subjects. And they may talk about subjects very differently on one day, and then it disappears the next day. Like, that's not the hot button issue anymore. So I would listen for a little bit and then see, hey, did that inform kind of the voice that you want to have in that space? Or are you just saying, you know what, this space is too toxic for my issue, I'm going to move on to the next space and listen there for a bit?
Mhm. Yeah. Someone asked, which is a really great idea, but how do you come up with content ideas? You know, if you're not necessarily like an arts type organization where maybe it's easy to just post a video of what you're doing, like what are some good ways to help come up with some content ideas? And is AI a good way to kind of use some like captions, you know, and ways to kind of make it be a little bit more catchy so that people kind of react to it? Um,
Uh, So you can, if you Google like kind of content templates or things like that, there are so many different things out there already. Like, hey, these are 60 different ideas for social media posts you could use today. There are a lot of like kind of ideas like that, that like on this day, do this, on this day, that do that. I would just caution relying solely on AI to kind of give you what you're talking to, because I don't know. I don't personally want to become friends with robots unless I know it's a robot that I'm becoming friends with. And then and then I'm going in it as a goof. Uh, but I would just like, there are a lot of idea generation things that you can go to out there. I mean, there's even like cards that ask probing questions. So if you don't know, you could just start with lots of questions that you're asking others to kind of chime in on and weigh in on, type of thing.
no.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, from an influencer perspective, typically it's campaign based. So like the content creation ideas are mostly around a particular initiative or a program that they're trying, or a fundraising initiative. So it becomes a little bit easier to come up with those ideas because those are campaign specific. But even going into strategic sort of planning around how to leverage influencers for the upcoming year or upcoming years is really thinking about like the organization as a whole, and what are the things that you want to make sure that you're communicating or having conversations about, right? So whether that's a particular, you know, advocacy piece or a particular piece of news, or even just highlighting your staff. I mean, there's so many different things that you can build communication and conversation around. I think you just kind of almost have to look inward and think like, what are the 3 to 5 things that we could have conversations about for this quarter or this year, or things like that, and then maybe use AI to come up with ideas around what those conversations or prompts could look like. Maybe then make sure that you know, maybe they're polished in a way that aren't robotic, right? I think AI helps you brainstorm really well. I think AI can help you maybe fill some gaps that you may have. But to Mike's point, I mean, it can't be your, you know, ask the prompt, get the output, paste it strategy, because then everything is not unique to you and very robotic. And I think it loses its authenticity, but it can be helpful in providing some ideas and some concepts that you could probably further iterate on to make it more unique to you.
I mean, one of the easier ones are just holidays. There are like the regular big holidays, and then there is like take your bear to work day. There are just some bizarre ones that, and there is a calendar online. If you search, this is one guy that has a list of all the holidays that are out there. I mean, that can work for a lot of organizations, but it might not work if you're in the sexual assault prevention space, let's say, to be celebrating holidays. So I think, again, it's like, how does this moment in time relate to who we are and what our mission is? And can we use that particular tactic of holidays? Maybe not, but there are like lots of things like that that are kind of easy lifts that aren't surprising if you're weighing in on saying something about it, really.
Yeah. And I actually noticed this chat in our question in the chat that I missed before, but it's a good point is, you know, how do you convince leadership to sort of get involved in, you know, one, either even doing paid advertising with social media or influencer marketing, or even to just get started with it, because you might even have some nonprofits who don't see social media or influencer marketing as a way to tell their stories. So how do you feel like, what are some things you could tell them to help convince leadership to be on the same page and realize that this would really help them in the long run?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the two things that I always hear are, we don't have the budget for it, or our audiences, you know, it wouldn't reach our audiences. So I think from a budget perspective, I always say there's 4 ways that you can get influencers to be a part of what you're doing. The first one is asking for a donation, right? If you've done your research and you've found an influencer that is aligned with who you are and what you do, maybe they talk about, maybe they already follow you. If you can think very specifically about how they could be involved, why it would be impactful and what that could look like, and be very specific and very detailed and very authentic and thoughtful about your approach, you might be able to solicit a donated post, right? Don't just reach out to an influencer and say, hey, will you donate something? But be really thoughtful about your approach and how you would want to work with them. So you can get a post donated. You could get, you could trade, right? Maybe you're a nonprofit that has great relationships in the business community that give you dinners to raffle off, or hotel stays, or maybe you have merch that you sell. So maybe there's a way to trade, like, hey, we actually have a really good connection at the Hilton over here. Maybe we can get you a night if you do a post, right? So maybe there's like a trade you could do, right? Almost like a barter. The third thing is co-marketing. Your local businesses are doing things. They're already probably marketing. Maybe they're already using influencer marketing. There may be ways to do some type of co-marketing around a percentage of sales or a donation campaign that's doing, and maybe that local business gets subsidized half, 75, all of it from a budget perspective, and maybe they're able to pay and then include your nonprofit as a, you know, a participatory or recipient of the sale or the promotion that's happening. And obviously the fourth piece is paying for it, but asking some sort of nonprofit rate. So those are sort of like the ways to approach the budgetary question or the conversation, and sort of kind of talk through that with leadership and how those things could look and what things you could try. Obviously, the donated post is the best way to go. And so you could talk about with leadership how we're going to approach the donated post, why we think it's important, what the initiative is going to be, and here's some of the people that we're going to go after. So that's like the budget piece. The second piece is the demographic one. I hear all the time, like, nobody, our audience is older, they're not listening, or they're not following you as influencers. Content is content. And whether you're using an influencer to engage with their own audience, or whether you're using that influencer for the content, these platforms are wide ranging and you know, amazing pieces of storytelling. So yes, are there instances where your audience, 100% of your audience or your donors are of a demographic that isn't following, you know, Nick, the video game follower? Yeah, sure. Like, no, of course not. But there is still opportunity to either engage new audiences using influencer marketing, or if you have an audience that needs or could benefit from different types of storytelling, then leveraging influencers to tell that story or to activate their audiences, I think is really a good way to approach leadership, to again, to align whatever the goals are or whatever the gaps are in the organization as a tactic to do that.
I'd also just find out what affirms things for that CEO, for the leadership. Like what are things that they value, and then see how any of the strategies or tactics you want to take in social media could actually deliver on that main thing that person values. Maybe it is that they like a very highly visible thing that they're looking for. So I would focus on ways that you could make the organization visible. Maybe it is a monetary thing. I would try to focus on the path to getting the donations in through any of your activities. But really starting off, like, what is going to move that leadership's needle? And then figuring out what can you do to align with how they like being affirmed.
Yeah. Well, it's 2 o'clock. This went faster than I expected. So thank you both, Michael and Nick. It's been great talking to you and sharing your insight on both. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And the next session will start at 2:05. It's the nonprofit panel. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.